In today's video, I'm going to show you how you can make a spooky chocolate box with 5 Halloweeny chocolate designs for Valentine's Day.
Welcome, my pretties, to the Awfully Sweet channel.
I drew and cut multiple shapes: an oval, a rectangle, a circle, and a very thin and long rectangle. I'm using an orange acrylic paint pen to draw the shapes on black felt. In total, I drew 3 ovals, 1 circle, and 1 rectangle. These will be the bottoms for my chocolate cups, but you'll probably need to double the amount for your chocolate box to be full. I then cut the shapes with scissors. The very thin and long rectangle will be used as the border of the chocolate cups. I'll need 2 rectangles for 1 cup. Since I'm making 5 cups, I'm drawing 10 rectangles. I then cut them as well. I'm using some tiny metal wires to put between my rectangles. I place 1 piece in the middle of my rectangle, cover it with hot glue, and place another rectangle on top. I open my work to add more hot glue. I'll need a second metal wire to cover the length of my rectangle. I place it as close as I can to the first wire and glue it down. I cut the part that is sticking out with pliers. I then glue the right side to seal it shut. I'm using zigzag scissors with tiny teeth to cut the side that I just sealed with glue. I only cut enough felt to give it a paper cup look. It will give a more realistic look to the chocolate cups, and you can see how well the 2 layers of felt are sealed with the glue. I repeat this process with all of my rectangles until I end up with 5 chocolate cup borders. I then fold my borders into tiny accordions to give them some texture. This is how they look like once folded. To assemble my chocolate cups, I'm using some black embroidery floss that I measure around the bottom of my cup. I'm making 3 circles around my shape. I make 2 knots at one hand and place the embroidery floss inside of my needle. Starting on the side that is not sealed on the border, I'm going to blanket stitch the border to the bottom all the way around it. When I reach the end, I'm going back to my first stitch to complete the shape. The border is a little bit too long, so I'm cutting the excess with scissors. I can now stitch the border together to finalize my chocolate cup. I then make a knot on the side and place the end of the embroidery floss under the cup. I leave a small extra floss part that I'm going to glue later on. I repeat the exact same process for every shape of chocolate cups. I'm using a styrofoam ball of 1.5 inch for the chocolate eyeball. I'm cutting the ball in half with a kitchen knife. I'll cover one half with white felt. I'm drawing a circle where the edge is touching the middle of the styrofoam. I then cut the shape with scissors. To close the felt, I'm using white embroidery floss. I make 2 knots at one hand and place the floss inside of my needle. I'm going to stitch all around the circle, leaving a small gap at the top. When I almost reach the end, I place the styrofoam piece in place and pull on the floss to stretch the felt. I cut the excess and pull really tight to close it. I then make a few knots to keep it in place. This will be the base for the eyeball. Next, I'm going to make the iris and pupil to complete the look. I trace a circle on pink felt and a tiny heart on black felt using a pink acrylic paint pen. I then cut my shapes using scissors. I'm using some fabric paint that I transferred into a smaller bottle. I'm adding more details to the iris of the eye with the color deep red. Starting at the middle of the circle, I am making small straight lines all around the edge. I place it aside to let it dry overnight. Once dry, I glue the black heart on top of it and glue the iris to the eyeball. I'm using a round chocolate cup for this chocolate. I place a good amount of hot glue under the eyeball and place it inside of the cup. I also glue the black embroidery floss that is sticking out. I then add veins to my eyeball with the color neon plum. I try to work with the texture of the felt for the placement of the veins. I'm adding the last details with white fabric paint. I do tiny dots on the iris to replicate the reflection of the light on the eyeball. And this is how it looks. The first spooky chocolate is complete. I'm cutting 2 squares in white felt to work on the chocolate brain. I place a line of hot glue in the middle of my squares, roll them and glue the ends. On the other half of the styrofoam ball, I glue my pieces of felt at the top and at the bottom. I want my felt to be as large as the styrofoam piece, so I cut the excess. This will give the base of the brain a more oval shape to work with, and it will look more realistic. Just like I did with the eyeball, I'm going to cover the brain with white felt using the same technique. Next, I'm cutting 4 long rectangles in white felt and rolling them with hot glue. I twist them in zigzags and glue them to the base to create the texture of the brain. Each piece of felt will cover a quarter of the brain. I try to place the ends at the bottom so they won't be too visible. My zigzags go from one side to the middle at the top. In the end, it should look like the brain is separated in 2 parts in the middle. I place a good amount of hot glue under the brain and place it inside of an oval-shaped chocolate cup. This one is a little bit tight, but I make sure to push it all the way inside of the cup. I also hot glue the black embroidery floss under the cup. I'm adding some details with fabric paint using the color Neon Plum. I try to make the texture stand out, and I also add a blood splatter. And this is how it looks. The second spooky chocolate is complete. I drew a ghost with a cute little bow for the chocolate ghost. I traced the ghost twice on white felt with a pink acrylic paint pen. I cut the ghost with scissors. I place my drawing on one of the ghosts and trace the eyes. I'm using black fabric paint that I transferred into a smaller bottle to paint the eyes.
How cute!
I then traced the bow on red felt and cut it with scissors.
Just adorable.
I glue the bow on my ghost and add some details with Neon Plum fabric paint. I let it dry overnight. Once everything is dry, I can assemble the ghost together. I'm measuring white embroidery floss by making 3 circles around the ghost. I then blanket stitch starting at the bottom. When there is only a small opening left, I fill the ghost with polyester stuffing. I use a sculpting tool to push it to the sides. Once it's full, I stitch the bottom with the blanket stitch. I'm using an oval chocolate cup for my ghost. I glue the black embroidery floss under the cup. I also glue and roll a small piece of white felt. I cut it to fit the size of the ghost and glue it under the chocolate. I put a good amount of hot glue and place it inside of the chocolate cup. And this is how it looks. The third chocolate is now complete. I drew a skull with hearts for the chocolate skull. I traced it twice on white felt with a pink acrylic paint pen. I cut the shapes with scissors. I placed the drawing on one of the skulls and traced the eyes, nose, and mouth. I carefully cut the eyes and nose to create small openings. I fold the skull to make small incisions and cut the tiny parts outside of the lines. Next, I'm cutting a small piece of pink felt to place behind the eyes. It is similar to the shape of the skull. I remove a small triangular part to not cover the nose. I also cut a small piece of white felt to place behind the nose. It has a diamond shape to fit the tiny opening. I glue the pieces of felt in place with hot glue, starting with the nose. This will give some dimension to the skull as well as a touch of color. I'm adding fabric paint around the openings using the color Deep Red. I simply trace a line around the eyes and the nose. I also trace the mouth and add tiny lines to create the teeth. I then let it dry overnight. I'm tracing and cutting 5 circles on pink felt to create whipped cream that will go on top of the skull. I'm using pink embroidery floss to assemble my whipped cream. I fold a circle twice, place it on top of another circle, and stitch it in place twice in the corner. One circle will cover a quarter of the other circle. I repeat this process with each circle. Once I'm done, I make 2 knots under the whipped cream. Then I can pull and place my pieces of felt into a cute whipped cream shape. Once everything is dry, I can assemble my skull together. I'm measuring white embroidery floss by making 3 circles around my skull. I then blanket stitch starting at the top since it will be hidden by the whipped cream. When there is a small opening left, I fill the skull with polyester stuffing. I use a sculpting tool to push it to the sides. Once it's full, I finish my blanket stitch. I use a tiny pom-pom as a cherry and I hot glue it in the middle of my whipped cream. I then place the whipped cream on top of my skull and glue it in place. I'm using an oval-shaped chocolate cup for my chocolate skull. I put a good amount of hot glue behind the skull and place it in the chocolate cup. I also glue the black embroidery floss under the cup. I use fabric paint in the color Neon Plum to add a dripping pink syrup to my whipped cream. I start around the cherry and work my way down, making smaller and long drips. And this is how it looks. The 4th chocolate is now complete. I traced one of my fingers on a piece of paper for the chocolate finger. I trace it once on beige felt, flip it, and trace it again. I then cut the shapes with scissors. I also drew the shape of a nail and a small oval. I traced them on beige felt as well. I'm using beige embroidery floss to assemble my finger. I make 3 circles around the shape to measure the length. I blanket stitch starting at one of the corners. When I reach the other side, I fill the finger with polyester stuffing. I use a sculpting tool to push it to the sides. When the finger is full, I place the oval on the opening and finish my blanket stitch. This is literally my finger. I glued the nail on with hot glue. I cut a small rectangle of gray felt and roll it using hot glue to keep it in place. I then place it around the finger as a ring and glue it on. I cut the excess with scissors. I'm adding some details with white fabric paint that I transferred into a smaller bottle. I put a line of white at the bottom of the nail to make it more realistic. I put some white on the silver ring to make it look shiny. I also put white for the details of the fingers joints. I use a rectangle chocolate cup for my chocolate finger. I put a good amount of hot glue under the finger and place it inside of the cup. I'm adding some blood with fabric paint in the color deep red, making a dripping effect. And this is how it looks. The fifth and final chocolate is now complete. I'm using a real chocolate box that I picked up from my recycled bin. This was a Valentine's Day gift to my husband, and I thought I could reuse the box for this project. I'm going to cover the inside with a red satin fabric. I'm tracing around the heart with a black Sharpie, leaving some extra space all around the shape. I then cut the fabric with scissors. I clean the inside of the box with a Lysol wipe to remove any chocolate residue and dry it with a Scott towel. I'm tracing the heart on 2 small foam sheets with a regular pencil to cover the holes in the chocolate box. I'm cutting the shapes with scissors and I make sure that they fit perfectly inside of the box. I remove tiny pieces of foam here and there to do so. I then glue the 2 pieces of foam inside of the box. Just like that, the holes disappeared and the bottom is flat. Next, I place my red satin fabric on top of it and glue it all around the edges inside of the box. I then glue the remaining fabric to the side of the box. The fabric is a little bit too long at the top, so I cut it with scissors. I want it to be approximately at the middle of the side of the box. It's time to gather all of my spooky chocolates. In this tutorial, I showed you how to make 5 different chocolates: the eye, the brain, the ghost, the skull, and the finger. To fill your chocolate box, you'll need to double or triple the amount depending on the size of the box. You can try different variations with different colors like I did. Before gluing the chocolates to the box, you want to figure out the best emplacement for each chocolate. Move them around, try different positions, balance the sizes and colors. I think this is probably the most important step for this project.
Make it look beautiful.
Once you have figured out the placements for your chocolates, you can glue them one by one. I pick up one chocolate, Put a good amount of hot glue under the cup and place it back in the same position inside of the box. I do this with each chocolate.
How fabulous!
Next, I'm going to cover the other side of the box with the same red satin fabric. I trace the heart a little bit larger than it really is with a black Sharpie. I then cut the shape with scissors. With the shiny side facing down, I place the box on top and glue the fabric all around the edge. Next, I'm tracing 2 long stripes on white felt. Each stripe will cover half of the heart's side for the length, with 2 centimeters for the height. I cut the stripes with scissors. I then trace smaller stripes on the red felt with 1.5 centimeters for the height. I cut the stripes and cut them again into small rectangles of 2 centimeters. I measure one piece with a ruler and use this piece as a guide for all of my stripes. I then glue my red rectangles on my white stripes. Half of the rectangle is placed on top of the last one to create some texture. When my first stripe is done, I glue it on the side of the box to cover the red satin fabric. This will give a more finished and detailed look. I cover my second white stripe with red rectangles like the previous one and glue it on the other half of the box. And this completes the spooky chocolate box. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial and that you feel inspired to create your own version. If you've made it this far and enjoy Halloween crafts, please be sweet and leave me a little treat by clicking on my pumpkin bell to subscribe to the Awfully Sweet channel. Don't forget to hit the bell notification to know when a new video comes up. There is always enough room on my broom for another crafty ghoul. Thank you for hanging out with me. Have a fabulous day. Bye!